Let me ask you a question that changed absolutely everything for me. What do you think your partner's number one complaint is about you during conflict? You see, for me, if my wife Jen was here sitting down with us right now, she would tell you that her number one complaint is that when we get in arguments, I really feel like I'm pretty right. And more specifically, I am not open to any other perspectives. This was really true about 4 or 5 years ago, and I had no idea the impact this was having on my relationship with Jen. 4 years ago, we had welcomed our third child, William, into our family. This is my first, my wife's third. And much like any family that goes through this type of transition, there was tons of change taking place. And we had made a decision as a family that for the next year, both of us being self employed, I was going to be focusing on work, and Jen was going to be really starting to focus more on taking care of the house and the kids so that we could navigate this transition. And a couple months into it, I remember this so clearly. I just felt like Jen was not holding up her end of the deal. And for me, when I get into that mode historically, what I do is I typically double down. Not only do I fulfill my end of the deal, but I look for opportunities to be able to go and do more. I really kind of sometimes get into this keeping score mentality where it's really easy for me to look at all the things Jen hasn't done and all the things that I've done extra just to continue to validate the indifference of our effort. And at this particular point in time, with all this extra effort being put in, there might not have been piles of laundry thanks to me, but there was certainly big, big, big fucking piles of resentment starting to build. And as you might guess, this doesn't lead to more connection, more intimacy. This started to create a bit of a wedge between us when we weren't addressing this. And as I continued to think that I was right, there was less and less intimate conversation. There were many days where, truthfully, I didn't even really want to be at home. And the idea of physical intimacy was an absolute dream or a joke as a result of the emotional friction and the unseen tension that was getting between us. And I'm not alone in this. Let me tell you about my client, Mark. So Mark is an executive coaching client of mine, one that I have worked with for years, and he is a leader inside of an emergency medical services organization. And he had called me in and asked me to sit down originally to start to explore how he might start to intentionally invest in growing his leadership skills, something that truthfully, as I got to know him, I started to realize he was really good at. I mean, 25 years ago, he had started in the field himself, on trucks, on planes, triaging patients in the field. And as a result of his success and his leadership, he was now in the top seat. And so we started to talk about what does really effective leadership look like in an organization like yours, where success is saving lives. And it was really clear being able to take control when you need to, make really fast decisions, and to construct and design an organization where there's a really clear and effective chain of command were all really important things that he was really good at, truthfully. And so as we started to explore that, I asked him, how is your home life going? Tell me about your family. Tell me about what your leadership looks like outside of these four walls. And that's where things got a little awkward. There are different environments and different ways that we talk about success. And when it comes to winning at work in this particular environment, saving lives is really important, and making the right decisions is obviously a key part of that, and taking responsibility for that. But at home, a different environment with different goals, it's really around effortless belonging. It's about investing in nurturing a really safe, connected environment for the people that you love. And ultimately, while yes, we have stuff we have to go and solve and get done day to day, winning means doing that in a way where it's not compromising the relationship itself. So as I said, you can see here, there are two very different environments. And as I started to get to know Mark, it was really clear to me that he was winning at work and leading really, really, really well with his team, but he was losing his wife. So as I got to know Mark more and more and hear some of his stories, it became quite clear to me that what was really going on here was that Mark was unconsciously bringing home this emergency room leadership style to his own front door at the end of the day. And it was driving a wedge between him and his wife and him and his kids. Now, I can really relate to this personally, and maybe you can too, often under the disguise of just trying to be helpful. When we're faced with challenges as a family, it's very easy for me sometimes just to jump in and try and make it right or solve the problem. And ultimately taking over somebody else's experience to try and get to that end outcome as quick as possible. Takeover looks a little bit different sometimes for each of us. Often it can look like taking over somebody's story by sharing what our experience is and how hard it is for us, and really emphasizing the things that maybe other people don't see. Sometimes it focuses on pointing out why somebody else's perspective is wrong and maybe illuminating and highlighting the things that they aren't privy to or are maybe missing in our opinion. Or at its worst, it's actually trying to talk somebody out of the feelings that they have because based on what's happening, they really shouldn't feel the way that they're feeling and really starting to trivialize what their own personal human experiences. Takeover looks differently for each of us in different moments. But it's important to ask ourselves, why do we take over? I think there's a couple different reasons. Firstly, I feel like a lot of us take over because we genuinely want to help the people that we love. We want to alleviate the pain or the frustration so that way we can get back to a sense of harmony as quick as possible. Little do we know that sometimes by taking over, we're actually compounding and only adding fuel to the fire around maybe the conflict or tension that's already there by not engaging others in that process or creating the space to really hear their story and their narrative. Another reason why we sometimes take over is because we've learned that it's really uncomfortable to hear somebody else's story. Or more specifically, if I look back and I'm really honest with you, sometimes it's really uncomfortable and I take over because if I really hold out the space and learn what's going on for you and sit there in the soup and welcome you in, I might actually realize that I've been complicit in creating some of the conditions that we're struggling with. So the reason why we jump in and we take over will change for each of us. And sometimes at the end of the day, we're doing that to be able to create an opportunity to highlight the value that we think we can bring to our family or to start to really amplify the status and the way that we can go and contribute, the way that we know how to contribute, more often than not from a work environment too. So over time, I would start to open up and share some real, personal, honest stories with Mark about how I would take over in certain situations at home and the impact that it was having on the people that I love most. Over a few of these conversations, it really started to illuminate the pattern that was invisible to Mark earlier on. And I remember the day where we sat down together and he said, "Dave, I get it. I get how I'm starting to take over these situations and it's why I think it's helpful. It's actually creating more harm than good." And so I asked Mark, I said, well, this is a really important and critical question. Do you want to be rich or do you want to be right? Because right now, being right and being the hero in this moment is costing you a sense of trust, intimacy, and connection in your home. And ultimately, it's putting you on the pathway to relationship poverty. Much like any great leader, once Mark started to see and understand the dynamic that was taking place, he wanted to do something about it. So if you're like Mark or if you're like me, I'd love to share with you today a few things that are going to help you become a better student of your relationship and use these different moments where you might naturally take over and try and become the hero of the story and actually reframe them and use them as vehicles for deepening a sense of trust and intimacy with the people that you love most. So the first thing I want to share with you here is this concept of standing for three. A lot of times when we get into arguments or try and solve different challenges that our family is being faced with, we unintentionally take a standing for one perspective. And I think back to my example I shared with you earlier around laundry and getting things done in those early months and weeks when we had William. When I would typically bring up that challenge with Jen, it was very much from a, here's what I'm doing, here's what you're not seeing, here's what I need help with. It was all about trying to validate and advocate for my own perspective. When we lead at home, and if our goal is really to create a deeper sense of connection, we need to stand for three, which means that we have a mindset going into that moment around what do you need, what do I need, and what does our relationship need? And bringing up a challenge and navigating it with that standing for three mindset. How can we all win here? And how can we create a conversation where we can thoughtfully explore and come to some insight and new possibilities that are going to actually help you, help me, and help our relationship at the same time? Now, one of the best ways to stand for three comes down to the second thing I want to teach you today, which is declare your intention. One of the things I use all the time myself in my own home, and I coach a lot of my clients to bring into these key conversations, is just upfront, explicitly stating to the people that you love, hey, I want to find a solution here that works for both of us. By setting the tone like this, what we do is we immediately make it really clear that we're coming into that conversation with an interest and an appetite to better understand somebody and to find something that's going to be a win-win outcome for everybody. This is so important because it immediately sets an environment where others know they can put their guard down and that they're being asked to actively participate in a conversation. I remember sharing this with Mark, and he had quickly come back to me just to share it with a lot of excitement how big of an impact this had on a conversation that him and his wife have been having for many, many months around how they're going to better deal with his father-in-law when he comes over and points out all the shit inside the house that they're not taking care of and how they need to go about doing things differently. One of Mark's biggest complaints is that whenever they would try and solve this or talk about this, that his wife Alyssa would always just shut down and not participate at all. And it would drive him nuts because he just wanted to find a way that they could work together. But the approach that he was taking on it, and just by advocating for what he was struggling with and talking about what he thought they should go and do and what the right decision was, it would always shut down Alyssa. But just by starting that conversation with this really clear declaration of, hey, I want to find something that works really well for both of us, immediately created an environment where Mark's wife, Alyssa, was starting to actively participate in that conversation because she could put her guard down and show up and lean in. All right, okay. Before we go any further, we just have to hit timeout and pause here. This is a really, really, really good idea. But what's not a good idea is to put the expectation on ourselves or our partners to do this perfectly every single time. Even for somebody like myself who's really intentional about doing this in my most important relationships, I fuck this up all the time. But even when we do miss that moment in that opportunity, what we always have available to us is the ability to go back, apologize, and begin again. Actually, truthfully, some of my best conversations with Jen and with my kids have not been as a result of me nailing this the first time, but it's a result of me going about it the wrong way, realizing that's what exactly I've done, and coming back 10 or 15 minutes later to be able to take ownership for what I did, apologize, make sure I know the impact that it had on somebody else, and asking if we can start again in a way where we can find an approach or a way moving forward that works for both of us. Let's keep going. And the last thing I want to share with you here is this lovely concept of don't put your hand up, put your hand out. In some of these moments, especially when I find myself getting frustrated and just trying to get to a solution, whether it's explicitly or even mentally, I can really be putting up my guard up front and say, no, I don't want any more of that. We just need to move forward with this. I know that I'm right. By making this subtle shift and actually putting our hand out, what we're doing, whether it's literally or metaphorically speaking in the way that we're approaching that conversation, is saying, hey, let's sit down together and let's explore what this can look like. Instead of giving somebody context, we can actually spend some time to actually earn the right to make a recommendation or to suggest something. It's really important that when we go into these conversations that we spend time asking really good questions to understand somebody else's perspective coming into this. A few of my favorite questions is, when was the last time this happened for you? And actually prompting somebody to walk through in great detail what that environment and situation and circumstance was like. Another one that I love to ask too is, well, how are you currently thinking about solving this? What are 2 or 3 ways that you've considered solving and addressing this problem? Just to better understand the approach or the unique perspective that somebody is working with. If I don't know that, I run the risk of immediately sharing something that they've already thought about or missing an opportunity to be able to build on something that I actually think is a really great idea. And lastly, one of my favorite questions to ask is, what are you worried about? At the end of the day, when it comes to solving some of the relational challenges that we have in our families, a lot of times we know what we need to do, and the actual technical way of doing it is really clear. But just when we want to go and do it, there can be this internal hesitation, almost like putting down the gas pedal, but hitting the brake at the same time. Each of us have a really sophisticated anxiety management system. And more often than not, the thing that is getting in the way of us and our partners and our family members solving problems is not knowing what to do. It's overcoming the worry of what might happen if we actually go and try and solve that problem. So asking, what are you worried about, is such an important question. One that helps us create context and put us ourselves in a position to really understand where somebody is coming from. And more importantly, build the sense of relatability and trust that is required for us to maybe go and do something different. So no doubt there are going to be moments and situations where we just have to take over and make the right call quickly. But 9 times out of 10, especially when it comes to the challenges that we face at home, that is just seldom the case. And when we take over, more often than not, it's actually creating more harm than good. So instead of seeing challenges that you're facing with your loved ones as moments and platforms to show that you're right and you know what to do, see those as vehicles to actually deepen your sense of connection and trust, and use them as opportunities to create more moments of effortless belonging with the people that you love. Because remember, it's never really about sex, money, alcohol, addictions, or kid challenges. What it's really about when it comes to leading at home is how do you talk about these types of things? And if we see it as an opportunity, these are actually all moments for us to really demonstrate our love for the people that matter the most to us and really have conversations in such a way where we can deepen the connection instead of dividing it by taking over. So at the end of the day, it's not a matter of if, it's what. What is that number one complaint your partner or your kids have about you when it comes to conflict? We all have something. So take a few moments, if nothing else from today, to reflect on what you believe that primary complaint is. And I invite you, create some space with the people that you love to actually ask them if you're right and if you have an accurate understanding of their experience of you. Because at the end of the day, if we can build better awareness of ourselves, we can make better choices. And when we make better choices, we can actually deepen the connection and love that I know you want so much of in your own home. So go ahead, let me know in the comments below, what do you believe the number one complaint is from your partner about the way that you navigate conflict? And what are you learning from today's video? And just remember, every single conflict and challenge that you face in your home is an opportunity to either show that you're right or that you care. The choice is yours.